There was this tweet that went kind of viral on Twitter recently, and it talks about how in Idaho, someone bought new tires for his daughter's Jeep as she is struggling in a house that she can barely afford. But then how the U.S. government helped refugees buy a house next door, and they saved so much money they were able to purchase a Range Rover, which a lot of you guys know is a very expensive car. Now, whether or not this exact story is true, we know that this happens. We've been over many mainstream articles talking about how this happens. There are documents from the government, which we have shown on the show, which show that this is something that is happening. And someone quote tweeted this and said, remember that no Americans ever voted for this. And this is absolutely true. If you look at the time of the 1965 Hart-Celler Immigration Nationality Act, the majority of the people were opposed to this. What was promised was completely untrue. It was a complete lie. When you look into the promises of Ted Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson at the time, Americans didn't vote for this. And he talked about how them and their children are going to be able to vote. Now, when you look into these posts here, whenever it talks about like refugees being resettled into northern states, Idaho, Washington, Montana, and so forth, you always see International Rescue Committee involved. Now, you also have the Agency for New Americans, which, you know, you look into, and it's Janus Inc. is like the parent company, and then there's another company and another company and another company. It's very hard to look into, and they do this deliberately so that you cannot follow the money, as they say. But the more powerful International Rescue Committee is always involved. You always see them come up. And this is an organization that started after World War II. Albert Einstein was actually involved in the creation of this organization, but so were a lot of other people. And this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go into the history of the International Rescue Committee. And I also want to talk about this video that came out, and it's of Irish politicians, and they go off and they talk about how they plan to destroy white privilege in their country through mass migration. One politician even says that he's happy that the, quote, very dull, white pasty Ireland he grew up in is coming to an end because of mass migration. So we're going to talk about this. A lot of people talk about a genocide, replacement, demographic replacement. You look at politicians like this, and this is suicide. This is what this is. This is a suicidal ideology when it's coming from people like this. And so we're going to explain exactly why. There's also a brand new Barbara Spector clip out. So we haven't heard from this person in years. Finally comes out with a new segment, and so we're going to take a look at some of the clips from that as well. Before we do, I just want to thank this video sponsor, and that is me. For those who've watched the show for a long time, you know we had a 100 million view YouTube account. We're on Facebook. We had 400,000 subs. We were on every platform. We were growing. We were getting more views than daytime CNN, and then they cut that off at the knees. And they did this for a very specific reason. It was because my message is very palatable. One of my videos can change or start to change the entire worldview of a single person that it's shared with. And so we've had advertisers pull out because they got attacked by mainstream media. They got attacked by the New York Times and Media Matters. And we need your support in order for the show to survive. We've been banned from social media platform after social media platform, payment processor after payment processor, Airbnb, Uber Eats, things that you would never think that you can be banned from. We were banned from. And so we need your support for the show. We've got a link in the description. It's flowcode.com/page/Vincent James. Subscribestar is good. It's like Patreon, which we were banned from, but without censorship. $2 a month, $5 a month, you get access to exclusive content. We've got cryptocurrency, Bitcoin. We just made a Monero wallet. Someone asked me to do that, so I did that. We've got the merch store. So if you get something now, you're going to get it in time for Christmas. We also got My Patriot Supply, 25-year shelf life dry food supply. So check it out. We've got the P.O. box up there. All of it is in that one link, flowcode.com/page/Vincent James. Check it out. All right, so let's get to this here. We've talked about the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, which is probably the most powerful refugee resettlement organization in the world. We played the clip before of them talking about how 1,000 rabbis got together and signed a letter asking the U.S. not to halt or limit immigration. But when it comes to northern states like Washington, Montana, Wisconsin, even Idaho, when you look into the resettlement of refugees, which is mostly happening in the whitest states in the country, you see that the International Rescue Committee is always involved. And so we're going to take a little bit of a look into the history of that organization. But before we do, I want to play this clip from these Irish politicians talking about how they're going to destroy white privilege. Take a look.
While it's true that the Irish have known a fair share of oppression, the reality is during that oppression we still maintained our invisibility cloak of white privilege.
And we often hear about white privilege, and It hadn't really occurred to me that I had white privilege as well, but now, listening to you, I understand that I do have a privilege.
I think we shouldn't forget that our Parliament still looks very male, very stale and pale.
Of course you can say that. You're a middle-class white man. So you view the law completely different to somebody who is a traveller, to somebody who is uneducated, to somebody who's maybe a member of the Roma community. So it is very, very different. You know that the law doesn't treat you the same. It doesn't treat you the same.
You, as a white privileged man, how does my debt impact your life?
I think it's worth putting on the record of this House that concept of white privilege and how that can be normatised in our own lives. And, you know, we as we develop as a society and a more racially integrated society, your whiteness is itself an advantage, and to really understand that.
Engage in that much more so in the very dull, white, pasty Ireland that I grew up in.
Dull, white, pasty Ireland that he grew up in. Now we talk about how, like, again, like people talk about the genocide, which, you know, if you look at demographic replacement, it really does, what is the UN definition of genocide? It really does meet that. You look at how it's absolutely deliberate, and we know it's deliberate, especially in America, when you see they're not doing anything to stop it. They're actually talking about how now they have to pass amnesty. It is a genocide, but then when you look at people like this, it's really kind of like a suicide. It's really kind of like a suicidal ideology. To be more exact. And, you know, this ideology, this white privilege this and white privilege that, we've talked about this before. This is how Elon Musk got into trouble a little while ago. He responded to a tweet. There was a tweet where someone said that, you know, you can't expect me to give a damn about the so-called anti-Semitism that Jews are facing because they have been the ones that have pushed all this hatred against white people for a long time. And this is historically accurate, right? You look into critical race theory, right? People talk about this all the time. Critical race theory, CRT, got to get it out of schools. This comes from critical theory, which comes from the Frankfurt School, which was a group of Jewish intellectuals who fled Europe after World War II, came to the United States, to the East Coast of the United States, embedded this ideology into the East Coast universities, and then it spread from there, and it turned into what we are seeing today. You look into all of the books, and we've talked about this before on the show. You look into all of the books that are on recommended reading lists and mandatory reading lists in schools, and not just universities, but high schools and even junior high. And you look at the authors of these books, and, you know, I don't give a damn if you're not supposed to say this stuff. This is how we get into trouble in the first place. This is why we're banned from everything. It is true. We're going to speak the truth. And you look into the authors of these books, and you see Metzel, and you see Kimmel, and you see Applebaum, and Wise, and Eisenberg, and Eshelman, and Lipschitz, and Frankenberg, and Katz, Kaufman, Hagerman, Rothenberg. You know, it's not every single person, but this statement is absolutely true. The statement that Elon Musk responded to and said, "You have spoken the actual truth," is actually true. They call him anti-Semitic for saying it. They call him anti-Semitic and racist for responding to it. They made him take a trip to Israel and stare at an empty crib with Bibi Netanyahu, who's a war criminal. But, you know, the statement is actually true. And so then let's sort of connect this to why this agenda exists in the first place, right? Why do you have this agenda of replacing the populations in these states? Well, and this is something we've been over on the show before as well. This is something that is in, you know, many of the threads that we have done on this channel before. You look into what supposed alleged conservative New York Times writer who is a Jewish American, Bret Stephens, says, and he says, well, these sort of liberal beliefs, especially when it comes to diversity, help keep Jews safe. Why does it help keep Jews safe? Well, it's because when you have a population that's so mixed up, they're not going to know who to hate. So it relates to the other clip that we've shown you before of Anthony Bourdain, where he talked about, or his friend talked about, how it's a kind of utopia, the fact that white people in 100 years won't exist. And Anthony Bourdain responds, who's Jewish as well, and he says, well, yeah, it's the only way. It's the only way to end hate. It's because they believe that, you know, if they can achieve this, then there won't be any persecution against them. It'll be less likely that another Holocaust is going to happen. And there's a bunch of other reasons that, you know, we don't want to get into in this segment today. But I want to play this Bret Stephens clip one more time for you, just so you guys understand. Take a look at this.
Well, the second thing is Jews, I think, have only really thrived and are only really safe in the world when liberal values are the dominant prevalent values. And by liberal values, I don't mean Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, okay? I mean liberal in the classic sense of respect for pluralism, emphasis on tolerance, emphasis on individual liberties, those panoply of values which are the DNA of what we call liberal democratic society. Trump administration represents a substantial and dangerous regression from those values. I think the comments, the attitude of this administration towards immigration.
There it is.
Mexican
there
immigration, Latin American immigration.
You understand? Are you starting to understand now? And of course, he's sitting next to Rabbi Shmuley, who runs like a sex website, and he's a rabbi. And he was with Michael Jackson. He was like involved with Michael Jackson before he died, right after he made those quote unquote anti-Semitic statements. Michael Jackson did. But we have a whole thing on him up on our website, dailyveracity.com, or at least a blurb on him and an article about Michael Jackson up on dailyveracity.com, our website. But this is the reason for this. And so now we know the reason for the agenda. So let's take a look at how they execute their agenda. So I'm going to bring you to this post here. Why are they sending refugees to the whitest states in the U.S. and then buying them houses? Why is the RSC always the main one behind it? Why did the founder change his name from Jacob Liebstein to J. Love? Who is Leo Schern? Where does the parent company of the Agency for New Americans get their money, and how many companies are behind them? So we're talking about Janice Inc., but let's take a look at this here, and you can see refugee arrivals in the past 10 years, and you see like all of the, and this is per 100,000 people in the state, so this is adjusted for population, and you see that these are the so-called whitest states in the country. Now, let's take a look at the International Rescue Committee. You can see that it was started by two left-wing factions, the Communist Party opposition, KPO, and the Socialist Workers' Party. And among those purged was Jay Lovestone, among those purged from Stalin's Russia, Jay Lovestone. His real name is Jacob Liebstein. Among those who joined him was Albert Einstein. So Albert Einstein, Jay Lovestone, Jacob Liebstein were involved in the creation of this organization. You also have Leo M. Schern, a Romanian Jewish compositor. So let's continue on in this thread. New Hampshire is 94% white. How can we fix that? We've shown you this article here before from the New York Times, and we've got the refugee numbers and then the percentage of the population that is non-Hispanic white alone in the country. Of course, this has changed drastically in a short period of time. We've got the current CEO of the International Rescue Committee, David Miliband. He is the son of immigrant parents who come from Polish Jewish families. Interesting. Imagine my shock. You've got Patrick Stewart doing commercials for the International Rescue Committee. Very, very odd, very interesting. And then this is the video we had in an article from back, I think it was right after the whole Afghanistan thing happened, the whole Afghanistan ordeal happened. And you have these white teachers from Idaho, Washington, and Montana who are practicing dressing up to get ready for migrants to come to their states. Take a look.
In the Northwest came together today. They're training alongside World Relief to help refugees.
Graham 2's Dana Marie McNichol sat in on the class today. She joins us now with what they learned. Dana Marie?
They said it was overwhelming. They were lost. They were disoriented. That's how educational students at Whitworth and Eastern University felt as they became a family living in a refugee camp going through the steps to call America home. Today, these are not students.
Oh my gosh. This is just like the Irish politicians. This is what I'm talking about. This is like suicidal. It's totally suicidal. Why? This lie. Diversity is a strength. You repeat it enough, it eventually becomes truth in people's minds. And even if it isn't true in their minds, they're afraid to say something about it because they're afraid of being called racist. Again, still suicidal. Still totally suicidal. You've got the founder of the IRC, who also worked for the CIA, apparently, which is an interesting fact. We've talked about Hayes and the 1,000 refugees. We've talked about, we already showed you the clip from Brett Stevens, who supposedly is supposed to be a conservative Jewish American. The clip from Anthony Bourdain, which explains why the agenda exists in the first place. And again, you see, just like it was true, just like the statement that Elon Musk responded to on Twitter, which he got in trouble for, was true, this part of it is true as well. Now bring it back to the States. Outside of Ireland, bring it back to the States. And you know, Ireland doesn't need to have a crystal ball, right? The people of Ireland, they don't need to have a crystal ball to see if this experiment of diversity, this multicultural experiment, actually works or as a good thing, to see if diversity truly is a strength, truly does make their nation stronger, all they have to do is look to America. We've been doing this experiment for a long time. We've been doing this experiment since the 1960s. It hasn't really worked out for us. Look at Los Angeles. I said this in the previous segment. Look at Los Angeles in the 1950s. Look at Los Angeles today. Look at California, which was called the Golden State in the 1950s. Look at California today. Okay? Look at Texas back then. Look at Texas today. Look at all of these cities. Look at Chicago. Look at all of these big cities in the country. Does it look like it worked out for us? Does it look like it actually made the country stronger, made the country better, made the country safer? Rather, in what way is diversity a strength? In what way does it actually make a nation stronger? Today, the foreign-born population of the U.S. has reached 49 million for the first time ever. 49 million for the first time ever. And if you go back to the 1960s, you go back to the Hart-Celler Immigration Act and when it was introduced, because our previous immigration policy was deemed racist, you look at what was promised by politicians like Ted Kennedy as he introduced a bill thought up by people like Emanuel Seller. And here is what they promised. I'm going to play this clip. This is a clip from a segment that we did a long time ago, many years ago. Take a look at this now.
On what the bill will not do. First, our cities will not be flooded with 1 million immigrants annually. Under the proposed bill, the present level of immigration remains exactly the same. Secondly, the ethnic mix of this country will not be upset. Contrary to the charges in some quarters, this bill will not inundate America with any immigrant from any one country or area, or the most populated and economically deprived nations of Africa and Asia. In the final analysis, the ethnic pattern of immigration under the proposed measure is not expected to change as sharply as the critics seem to think. Thirdly, the bill will not permit the entry of subversive persons, criminals, illiterates, or those with contagious diseases or serious mental illnesses. As I noted a moment ago, no immigrant visa will be issued to a person who is likely to become a public charge.
Now, obviously, all of this turned out to be true. Everything that they promised would not happen actually came to fruition in this country. Emanuel Seller strongly supported help for Jewish refugees fleeing Europe. His paternal grandparents and maternal grandmother were Jewish. You see this article from the Wall Street Journal opinion. Jewish organizations had a role in the 1965 Act. Jewish organizations also organized, funded, and performed most of the work of a variety of umbrella organizations aimed at combating the 1924 law. The 1965 reform was thus not the result of popular pressure, but rather a 40-year program of activism. So this is how we've explained the agenda, we've explained the reason for the agenda, and we've also explained how they've executed this agenda. And we have people falling for this completely suicidal agenda, this completely suicidal ideology. Take a look at Alex Mayorkas. This is the guy who was, he's the DHS secretary, and he was the guy that was sitting next to Joe Biden back when he was a senator, when Joe Biden said that we were going to have an unrelenting flow of immigration, nonstop immigration, and he talked about how it was a good thing that white people are going to become a minority. Basically, verbatim, this is what he said at that time. Alex Mayorkas is now Biden's DHS secretary, and he's also a Jewish American, and he was asked recently about the illegal aliens, which is probably more likely 30 to 40 million people. We talked about this in the previous segment here. He was asked, what we're going to do with them. Like, what is the plan for them? Here is what Mr. Mayorkas had to say. Now, mind you, they're not trying to deport these people. We've played a clip before of Mayorkas admitting, right there on Fox News, that they're just allowing these people to come in. They don't care. They're allowed to basically stay forever. They're helping to transport them to their final destination. Heck, like we said at the beginning of the segment, they're helping to buy them houses. Well, here's what he had to say about the ones that are illegally here already. Take a look.
It also doesn't address the other sort of elephant in the room, which is dealing with the undocumented immigrants who are already here in the nation. And I know it's been a political football as to trying to figure out the best way to address that. But I'm going to ask you, what is the best way to address that from your perspective?
The answer is quite clear and quite straightforward, and we've been waiting for it for about 30 years. And that is to fix a system that everyone agrees is fundamentally broken, and we need congressional action, both for the lawful pathways that really need to be more robust in statute, and for the 12 million people who are here in the United States who have been contributing so fundamentally to our country's well-being. There are neighbors.
They've been saying 12 million for the past 40 years. They've been saying 12 million for the past 40 years. Now, here's something else before we dive into this Barbara Spector clip here. Let me just pull this up very quickly. This is something I posted recently. Crisis in New York. 94-year-old vet struggles to move on after nursing home evicts him and replaced him with migrants. Foster family told to vacate rent and home to make room for migrant children. California is asking foster families to take in 26 or more plus migrant children. U.S. waives FBI checks on caregivers at new migrant facilities. So when we talk about replacement, there's a lot more meanings than one to the word replacement in this context. Nursing home replaces veterans with migrants. Foster families are replaced with migrants. Foster homes are asking to replace the kids that they already have with migrants, so on and so forth. Let's get to this Barbara Spector thread here. The media and State Department says that claiming they have more loyalty to Israel than to the countries that they're born in is anti-Semitic. Meanwhile, here's what they have to say.
I was born in the United States, Madison, Wisconsin. I went to school and graduate school in New York. And then my husband and I, who was a conservative rabbi, came to Israel in 1967, where we spent another third of our lives, first in Ashkelon, then in Ashkelon, which is now rather notorious for what it's had to go through, Ashkelon, and then Jerusalem, and now Tel Aviv. And a third of my life I spent on the European continent, in Sweden. But not only in Sweden, but in Europe per se. And I say that to give you not just my biography, but to say that if you wanted to ask me what my citizenship is, I pay taxes in all three. I have citizenship in all three, but my true citizenship is Jewish. I was born in the United States, Madison, Wisconsin.
And that's the same sort of thought process that someone like a Jonathan Pollard has, right? That's the same sort of thought process that someone like a Ben Shapiro has. So now you're starting to really understand some of the things that we've been talking about on the show. Here's another clip. Barbara Spector. Our people have created such a thriving nationalist culture in the U.S. and Israel. 30 seconds later, here's why we need to destroy European nationalism, because it's dangerous. I'm going to play this clip for you guys here. Take a look.
In America, let me put it this way. That seed was planted and you learned how to be a Jew in all sorts of different creative forms. You take that same seed of Jewish civilization and you put it in the sandy soil of Israel. Well, the roots have to go very deep in order to get water. But once they go deep, then you begin to have something so well rooted in its own soil, and it begins to produce its own culture. And we've had this privilege in Israel of being able to if America is the how to be Jewish, we can tell you what it is to be Jewish, what it is to create a culture, what it is to speak in your own language and have drama and poetry and art that is Jewish. And we can become a Jewish, what it is to be Jewish. You take that same seed of Jewish civilization, and now you take it and you bring it to the charred earth of Europe.
Charred earth.
And someone who I love very dearly once said, you know what? We're the grass growing underneath the ashes. I want to tell you now about Europe. In order to understand the catastrophe that's taken place, this earthquake of October 7th, let's understand not the Europe that you have in your mind of the black and white pictures of the Holocaust, but a new Europe. And now I'm going to speak to you again in threes. I have to talk to you about three contexts for this European Jewry. It's based upon the notion of a new Europe. Okay, Lyra? There were three things that took place in Europe post-war, after the war. The first was a series of, much under the impetus of the United States, a series of treaties meant to really eradicate the blatant nationalism that had been so destructive to Europe until the end of the Second World War.
There it is. Completely destructive to all of Europe. The blatant European nationalism, completely destructive to all of Europe. And then here she talks about how the fall of the Berlin Wall, she says, quote, for the first time our people who were afraid to show themselves because of the repression of communism were able to reassert themselves. That's a very interesting thing to say, isn't it? For those who don't, and we said we'll save this for another segment, but For those who don't know, here's a graph showing who the Bolsheviks really were. Talk about Leon Trotsky, whose real last name was Bronstein, and you've got several others who were involved. There's a clip here from a documentary that we play. We've got some more statistics. And then here in this clip, she explains how they got their funding through reparations Europe paid to Jewish people after the Holocaust, and how they're using this money to set up institutions all around Europe to, quote, fight the rising populist nationalism that is infecting Europe. So, we don't really need to, play all of these different clips here, but this is just to give you a sense. This is just to give you an understanding of exactly how this agenda is executed. And again, this is not everyone. This is not every single person. This is not grouping all people into one group, but painting with a broad brush, as they say. But here's the thing. The fact that you have to, qualify that, while they go on and on and on about white people this and white privilege that and white, and they don't get into trouble. In fact, they're promoted. The donors of the universities don't pull their money out when people talk about white people this way. It's a very interesting thing, and you have to ask yourself, at the very least, you have to ask yourself, why? That's what we have. Make sure to check out our flow code, flowcode.com/Vincent James. As I've said, we are under attack. We've been under attack for a while, and the attacks are definitely starting to feel the attacks. So make sure to check it out. Help the show in any way you can. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and we'll see you in the next segment. Since we've been banned from every mainstream platform that exists, we need your support for the show to survive. You can support by subscribing to my Subscribe-Star for $5 a month to get access to exclusive content and more at other tiers. You can also support by using cryptocurrency, our P.O. Box, and as always, going to preparewithvincent.com or waterwithvincent.com to get your 25-year shelf life dry food supply or water filter systems. Check out dailyveracity.com/support to find all the links. It helps the show tremendously.